objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Pursuant to Committee Rule 4 and House Rule 11, Clause 2H4, the chair announces that he may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment on which a recorded vote or the yeas or nays are ordered. Before we proceed, I'd like to go over some items for our hybrid meeting. Today, we are meeting both in person and remotely for the first time in several months. We can applaud if we like, but I can appreciate that people have mixed feelings. I have discussed the advisability of holding a hybrid meeting with the ranking member, and I want to be clear on what makes this format possible. First, the wide availability of vaccines in the United States and specifically to the members and staff of this committee. Second, the regular and continued practice of health and safety protocols. This pandemic is by no means over, but we have reached the point where we can safely engage in person if certain practices are followed. This information was previously provided to members and staff, but I want to reiterate what the committee will require in order for members and staff to participate in this hearing. First, if you are unvaccinated or your vaccination status is undetermined, you must wear a mask at all times. Second, if you are unvaccinated or your vaccination status is undetermined, you must maintain physical distance within the hearing room. 3, if you are feeling unwell, you should participate in the hearing remotely. And 4, members are permitted to be accompanied by one staff member while they are present in the hearing room. While the speaker has declared that we are in a covered period pursuant to House Resolution 8, remote participation in hearings will continue to be an option for members. Additionally, after today's proceedings, I will assess whether meeting in person is advisable and feasible. Subcommittee chairs continue to have discretion on the format for hearings that are held at the subcommittee level. However, the health and safety protocols for use of the committee's hearing room will apply to any committee or subcommittee proceeding. For those members participating remotely, if you are experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so that those issues can be resolved immediately. Members participating remotely must continue to remain visible on camera for the duration of their participation in the hearing, unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. It is committee policy that members participating remotely will remain muted when not recognized, and for those in the hearing room, the policy remains the same, that only members who are recognized or seeking recognition should unmute their microphone. This is out of courtesy to all members on the committee and so that background noise does not interfere with another member who is recognized to speak. And when you are recognized, whether in the hearing room or on the remote platform, you will need to unmute your microphone and pause for 2 to 3 seconds before speaking so that your words are captured on the live stream. In the event of a recorded vote, members are asked to state their name first before proceeding to render their vote. This will give the cameras a chance to locate who is speaking. Without objections, members will be recognized in order of seniority during any follow-up debate on amendments. This will make it easier for me to ensure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. If you wish to have a document inserted into the record, please ask for unanimous consent and have your staff email the document to veteransaffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov. It will be uploaded to the committee document repository. Please also use this email to submit any amendments that have not been previously submitted. Does any member have a question about the procedures for today's meeting? Hearing none and seeing none, we will proceed. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. So I want to thank everyone for being here. Today, I'm proud to mark up our bipartisan Honoring Our Pact Act. This has been a long time coming. Since I first joined the Congress back in 2013, I have been working to address toxic exposure. Every day I hear from veterans who are speaking out about their exposure to environmental hazards, and toxic substances, whether it's airborne hazards from burn pits or other sources while serving abroad, contaminated water at military bases from PFAS and other toxins, or radiation from atomic testing and cleanups. Last Congress, we took major strides and finally came together to pass the Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Act. But it took more than 40 years to do that. Let me emphasize that, 40 years. That does not take away from what is a monumental accomplishment, a bipartisan accomplishment. But the victory is bittersweet. Far too many veterans, for far too many veterans, help came too late, or not at all. We simply cannot let that happen again. This experience made it clear to me that we cannot keep legislating one location or disability at a time. We cannot keep the burden on veterans to prove the harm they experience. We cannot pick winners and losers from among conflicts or conditions. It is time for us to recognize toxic exposure as a cost of war, once and for all. The Honoring Our Pact Act will help us do that. Now, I do not use the term cost of war lightly or easily. Something our colleague, Representative Lamb, said at our last hearing really struck me and reminded me why this truly is a cost of war. I'm expanding on Mr. Lamb's comment, but when our service members joined or were drafted into the military, they signed a blank check to the American government and the American people, committing themselves to service. We cashed that check over and over again through many decades and through many wars, rarely asking the true cost. But rhetorically, we committed ourselves to caring for these same service members as veterans. So now the question is, will our actions match the rhetoric? Will we live up to our promise and commitment as our service members have? I hope the answer is yes, because it is a moral imperative that we must abide by. As a steward of taxpayer dollars, I am certainly cognizant of how we allocate resources in Congress, but I am not prepared to say to a veteran that this country will not help you because it is too expensive or too hard. That is not acceptable to me as a member of Congress or as an American. And right now, only certain veterans exposed to certain toxins during a particular time window, experiencing particular illnesses, are eligible to access care and benefits through VA for toxic exposure. This process places the burden on veterans to prove that they were exposed to toxic substances by their government. And even if they can prove it, these veterans still may not qualify for VA care and benefits. It is time to change that. We have an opportunity this year to pass comprehensive legislation that finally recognizes toxic exposure as a cost of war and reforms VA's presumptive decision-making process. Both Chairman Tester and I have made this a top priority for our committees. And President Biden, whose own son may have been impacted by toxic exposure, has also committed to bold and decisive actions, including those already taken by Secretary McDonough. I want to be clear that although we are marking up a bill today, we are not at the end of this process. Having a bill pass out of committee allows us to be on the same footing as the Senate and to begin to have in-depth negotiations on a final legislative package. There will be time to discuss scores and views, but we have momentum on our side now. I just want to say, we are not at the end of the process. I'll repeat that again. We are not at the end of the process. Together, we can finally right this wrong and ensure veterans aren't left waiting decades for the care and benefits they've earned. We owe them that much. And with that, I now recognize Ranking Member Bost for his opening statement. Ranking Member?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by noting that this is the first time this Congress that the committee has met in person or virtual, or in a hybrid meeting per se. Other committees have been meeting in person pretty well all Congress, and we were way overdue to be doing this. But it is fitting that this meeting is being held in person because the topic we are having to discuss here is one of the most important to most of the members, or if not all of the members of this committee. It is especially important to me. One of my proudest achievements is delivering benefits to Blue Water Navy veterans for Agent Orange exposure. We did that in 2019, 44 years after the Vietnam era had ended. I don't want any other veterans to wait that long. That is why I support toxic exposed veterans and support to them is one of my top priorities. I introduced the TEAM Act to provide care and benefits to the toxic exposure veterans and advanced toxic exposed research and training. The TEAM Act is a bipartisan and supported by dozens of VSOs. Pieces of it were added into Chairman Takano's Honor RPAC Act, which will be considered shortly. I wish I could support the Honor RPAC Act and encourage every committee member to do the same. But the fact is that we simply do not have the information we need to report the bill out of committee today. I've urged Secretary McDonald to come to the table for months, ever since he was appointed to the position. But we have no idea what the VA's views are on this bill. We have no idea what the Biden administration supports in it or not supports in it, or where their input is. We have no idea if we can implement it without disrupting services to other veterans. We have no idea how it will impact the operations of the VA health system or the delivery of benefits, the veterans and their families. We have no idea if it will cause longer wait times for medical appointments and benefit decisions. We have no idea if it will strain the VA staff or how many more people VA would need to hire to execute the mission. We have next to no idea about what it could cost taxpayers. And remember, the veterans are taxpayers too. Preliminary cost estimates for the CBO indicate the bill could cost over $1 trillion in new mandatory spending. We have no way to cover those costs, which are required to do by the pay-go language that is out there right now. It would also potentially add several $100 billion in new discretionary spending. We have had no discussion about how we are going to pay for that. And I could go on, but the conclusion is clear. We have a lot more work to do. Knowing that, we cannot responsibly vote this bill out today. I asked Chairman Takano this week to postpone the markup and that we would work together to get information we needed to proceed. The Senate VA committee is facing the same problems where we are. We need to work and find the realistic, scientific, sound, and financial response and responsible way moving forward. We need the Biden administration to be meaningful participants in our conversation. The idea that we have to take that vote, take a vote on a bill out of this committee before that is just hogwash. Well, let me tell you, I know what it's like to serve. I know what it's like to have a family who serves. I know how high the stakes are. I know that was what was mentioned, the cost of war. I'm a Marine. I'm a father of a Marine. I'm a grandfather of a Marine. 2 days ago, I visited Arlington Cemetery and grave sites and countless men and women who have paid that price. This is personal for me, just as much as it is to everyone on this committee. We all serve on the VA committee because we deeply believe in making sure that our nation's veterans are taken care of. But that doesn't excuse us from our responsibilities to address significant costs of this legislation or the requirements of complying with pay-go rules and and to proceed in a way that is transparent, fair to veterans and taxpayers. It doesn't mean we shouldn't get the information required to determine whether this bill will help toxic exposed veterans without compromising services to other veterans. Too many exposed veterans are sick and dying. I want to help them get the care and benefits that they need. There is bipartisan, bicameral ways to get this done. We need to stop wasting time marking up legislation that we know has no path to success and start working together to deliver the results for veterans. We were elected to do the hard work and make tough calls. I will do nothing less for my fellow veterans. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. The committee will now proceed to the consideration of H.R. 3967. The clerk will please designate the bill.
H.R. 3967 to improve health care and benefits for veterans.
Was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point.
Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Bost.
I move to consider that the consideration of H.R. 3697 be postponed for 90 days so we can work with the administration, Senate, and other stakeholders to find the viable path forward.
Are you raising a point of order?
No, I may make it a motion.
Making a motion?
Mm-hmm.
The motion is okay. Mr. Bost, Ranking Member Bost, I respect the motion the request you have made, but I'm not prepared to grant that request at this point in time.
It is a debatable motion.
Is there a okay. Ranking Member Bost, can you provide a rationale for the motion?
Yes. My opening statement, whenever I said we do not have the information, and that's what this motion is all about. If we gave, and it's an amendable motion, by the way. We're asking for 90 days, so that way the administration can come forward, that the VA itself can come forward, that we can work with our VSOs, work with our partners across on the other side of the Capitol to sit down to come up with a plan together so that we're not moving forward in a way and not aggressively going after something that can actually become law and provide for our veterans. And that's why I made the motion to postpone for 90 days.
Okay. Well, Ranking Member Bost, I'm going to rule against this motion since we do have the views and we do have preliminary responses from CBO, which under the rules of the committee are sufficient for us to be able to proceed. So I will proceed.
The motion is it does require a vote. I am requesting a vote. Yeah.
All right. All those in favor say, all in favor of Ranking Member Bost's motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed will say no.
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 Roll call.
The noes have it. The motion is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, roll call.
Okay. Subject to the call of the chair, we'll be in recess, and we will have the roll call.
Roll call when we get back. Okay.
Yeah. We'll have the roll call subject to the call of the chair. So the committee stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair. We will now proceed to a vote on Ranking Member Boss' motion to postpone to a date certain the consideration of the honoring our promise to address the Comprehensive Toxics Act of 2021. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Brownlee,
Brownlee votes no.
Mr. Lamb, Mr.
Lamb
Lamb,
votes no. Lamb votes no.
Mr. Levin,
Levin votes no.
Mr. Pappas, Mr. Pappas, Ms. Loria, Ms. Loria.
No.
Mr. Mervan,
Van votes no.
Mr. Sablon, Mr. Sablon, Ms. Underwood,
Underwood votes no.
Mr. Allred,
Allred votes no.
Ms. Frankel,
No.
Mr. Brown, Mr. Brown,
Brown votes no.
Ms. Slotkin,
No.
Mr. Trone,
No.
Ms. Capter,
Capter votes no.
Dr. Ruiz, Dr.
Ruiz votes no.
Mr. Gallego,
Gallego votes no.
Mr. Bost,
Aye.
Ms. Radewagen, Mr. Bergman,
Aye.
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Mr. Roy, Mr. Roy, Mr. Murphy,
Yes.
Mr. Mann,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Ms. Mace,
Aye.
Mr. Cawthorn,
Aye.
Mr. Nels,
Yes.
Mr. Rosendale,
Rosendale, aye.
Dr. Miller Meeks,
Aye.
Mr. Pappas, Mr. Roy, Mr. Sablon, Mr. Chairman,
Chairman votes no. The clerk will report the result.
Mr. Chairman, for this vote, there are 12 ayes and 15 noes.
The motion is not agreed to, and we will now proceed to consideration of the honoring our promise to address Comprehensive Toxics Act or the honoring our Pact Act. And I will now recognize myself. We had the text circulate in advance, and the first reading is dispensed with. The bill that we see before us today is the culmination of years of work by my colleagues and our staffs and advocacy by our veteran service organizations. And based on 15 proposals from members on both sides of the aisle, the honoring our promise to address Comprehensive Toxic Act of 2021, or the honoring our Pact Act, gives us an opportunity to finally recognize toxic exposure as a cost of war. VA's current decision-making process isn't working for veterans, and many are left wondering if they should even file a disability claim at all, knowing that it simply will be denied. Our bill impacts every aspect of toxic exposure and seeks to reform VA's process and eliminate the need for continued congressional intervention. When we send our service members into harm's way, we do so with a promise to care for them and pay for that care when they come home. It is time we honor our pact. Our bill will provide health care for potentially as many as 3.5 million veterans exposed to airborne hazards and burn pits. It will streamline VA's review process. It will finally concede exposure to airborne hazards and burn pits. It will require medical exams and opinions for veterans with toxic exposure disability claims. It will establish a presumption of service connection for 23 respiratory illnesses and cancers related to burn pits and airborne hazards exposure. It will create a presumption of exposure to radiation. It will expand Agent Orange exposure and add hypertension and MGUS to the list of presumptions. It will require VA provide standardized training and conduct outreach. And it will improve data collection between VA and DoD and commission studies. With the support of 25 of my colleagues, including all of the Democrats on our committee, and 9 veteran service organizations, I have tremendous hope that 2021 will be the year we pass comprehensive legislation to address the needs of all former, current, and future veterans. Our package includes bills from members on both sides of the aisle, including Ranking Member Boss' TEAM Act. And I hope you will join me in passing this landmark legislation. Caring for veterans exposed to toxic substances is more than another line item in the budget. It is the cost of war. And the commitment we have made when we send our service members into harm's way. The Honoring Our Pact Act finally recognizes that fact. Is there further discussion on the bill? Ranking Member Boss, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mr. Bost of Illinois.
Without objection, further reading of the amendment will be dispensed with. Ranking Member Boss, you are recognized for 5 minutes in support of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment in the nature of substitute would give VA 90 days to deliver information we need to support toxic exposed veterans. Specifically, it would require VA to tell us whether the administration supports this bill. It would also whether or not the administration believes the bill could be implemented as written. How would this bill impact the VA benefit system? How would this bill impact the VA healthcare system? How this bill would impact VA staffing, infrastructure, IT, and funding needs, and how much this bill will cost the American people. None of this information is unreasonable or unusual. It is standard information every member should have before voting on a bill. Under normal conditions, we would have it on this bill. Congress and this committee must have the ability to assess these plans with a greater level of detail so that we can better assure the veterans and American public that taxpayer dollars are being directed in the most effective and efficient way possible. I couldn't have said it better myself. Oh, I did. Mr. Chairman, those of you who those are your words exactly from the full committee budget hearing 2 weeks ago, when you were discussing needing more information from the VA. I couldn't agree with you more on that same principle, and it applies here. We held a hearing 7 weeks ago on several toxic exposure bills that are included in some way in the Honoring Our PAC Act. VA declined to provide views of cost estimates at the hearing. Many of us asked VA for that information during the hearing. I have asked multiple times since the hearing, and VA has still not answered us. Helping toxic exposed veterans is one of the most pressing issues that we face. I agree with you on that. Republicans and Democrats in the House and in the Senate agree. So do the VSOs. Yet the Biden administration we've experienced radio silence from them. That's unacceptable. I explained in my opening that why we cannot responsibly support the bill without input from the administration. Preliminary CBO estimates score the bill at over $1 trillion in mandatory money. The discretionary costs are estimated at several $100 billion on top of that. Those are unheard of costs from this committee. We do not have offsets and that come close to covering those costs. I hear those who are loudly proclaiming that this is all about the cost of war. I explained to you about how I feel about that. We still need to have the conversation about what the pay for will be. We still have to be fiscally responsible. We still have to find a way to support toxic exposed veterans without crippling the economy for future generations and endangering the services that are already being provided to our veterans. Before voting on this bill, we also need to know that it will help the veterans it is supposed to, and that it will not disrupt services for the veterans that I was just talking about. I have been in Congress long enough to see well-meaning, carefully crafted legislation fail upon first contact with the bureaucracy. We know it very well. We can't let that happen here and allow veterans to suffer the consequences. I wish VA would have done their job and to get us the information that we need to do our job on this before long. They did not. So my amendment would require them to do so. I know that we all care about supporting toxic exposed veterans. It is the right thing to do. My amendment will help us do it the right way. It will give us the information we need and work with the Senate and the stakeholders to deliver the real results for toxic exposed veterans. I hope it will have the support of every single member on this committee. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Boss. I do not support this amendment, and I will be urging members to join me in voting no. Ranking Member Boss' amendment would strike this entire comprehensive toxic exposure package based on 15 bills from members on both sides of the aisle and replace it with a feasibility and advisability study on implementation of the underlying bill. I do appreciate the ranking members raising important points that we must consider as we work on this bill, and for reminding us that this legislation will change how VA takes care of our veterans. However, it is our obligation as a nation to provide benefits and health care to veterans who are sick following toxic exposure because of their service. Since my first days in Congress, I've heard from veterans exposed to various toxins while defending our nation. This bill reflects years of advocacy from VSOs in collaboration with my colleagues, past and present. With this bill, we identify veterans who deserve benefits now and make them eligible for those benefits now. Several members of this committee will recall during our efforts to pass legislation on suicide prevention that we dispensed with additional studies due to the urgent need to make more resources available to veterans. We are in a race against time to honor the pact we have made with our service members affected by toxic exposure. Members on this committee will remember the impactful and emotional testimony offered at our legislative hearing in May by Mr. James Price, who was himself exposed to toxic substances during his military service and whose wife died from a rare cancer they believed was caused by exposure to burn pits. And at the time, my friend and colleague, the ranking member, noted, quote, "Today's hearing has made it painfully clear that the time to act for toxic exposed veterans is now." Thousands of veterans are suffering. They need us to meet this moment with meaningful action to deliver care and benefits they have earned before it's too late, end quote. If adopted, this amendment would delay assistance to veterans like Mr. Price, and unfortunately, this bill is already too late to help his dear wife, Lauren. This amendment casts aside the work that we've done here in Congress to craft a comprehensive benefits and healthcare package for toxic exposed veterans. All the while more veterans are getting sick and dying from their exposure. I'll note that the Honoring Our Pact Act has the same effective date as the Ranking Member Boss Team Act, which is included in this bill and was reported unanimously out of the Senate last Congress. And I'll point out that when it was reported unanimously out of the Senate in the last Congress, there was no CBO score. It was reported out because of the sense of the Senate that it was morally imperative to do so. I will further remind my colleagues that reporting this bill out of committee now is how we will get VA to provide feedback on appropriate phasing and timelines. The next obvious step is to ensure we resource VA to do the work. Now, I am committed to getting all of the information necessary from VA, CBO, and OMB in order to ensure this bill is accompanied by the resources needed to enable VA to provide benefits for these veterans. And I'm equally committed to making sure VA has what it needs to care for those who currently receive care from VA and provide the resources to care for toxic exposed veterans. But this amendment would needlessly delay benefits just to arrive at the answer we already know. VA can only do as much as we enable them to do. Also, in the words of my friend and colleague, the ranking member, quote, we have to do better. We owe it to those who are fighting illnesses right now. We owe it to future generations of service members, end quote. And I agree with that sentiment. 3 more months of delay and of studies won't help veterans get the care and benefits they need now. And with that, I urge my colleagues to join me in voting no on the Bost Amendment. Is there further debate on the Bost Amendment and the nature of a substitute?
Mr. Chairman, I seek recognition to speak.
I will. I'm going to recognize. Yes, go ahead, Mr. General Bergman. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like Ranking Member Bost, I also know the cost of war personally, very personally. I also want to support toxic exposed veterans. And I also have serious reservations about this bill. We need to improve access to care for veterans exposed to burn pits, PFAS, other toxins, in my case, Agent Orange. We need to advance research in the health effects of toxic exposure. We need to improve the training that VA staff receive on toxic exposure so they can better treat the veterans in their care. I think we all agree on those things, but we have to do them responsibly without breaking the bank or making it harder for VA to care for other veterans. The ranking member mentioned some of the major unknowns in this bill. Let me mention a few others. The VA healthcare system is already expecting an unprecedented surge in care over the next 2 years. We don't know what further demands this bill will put on the system. Waiting times are already far too long for far too many veterans. We don't know if this bill will cause them to skyrocket even further. VA clinicians are already overburdened, especially after this last year. We don't know what additional strains this bill will place on their shoulders. VA medical facilities are ancient compared to the private sector, increasingly costly to maintain, and completely misaligned with the current generations of veterans' needs. We don't know how this bill will further stress those facilities. The Veterans Health Administration's bottom line is already bloated. We don't know whether adding mandates that total several hundred billions, that's with a B, of dollars more will cause it to burst altogether. We don't even know if the Secretary supports this bill or if the President will sign it into law. Without that information, we cannot, I repeat, cannot move forward with the confidence that this bill is the right thing to do for veterans or for the taxpayers. I spent 4 decades of my life in a Marine Corps uniform. I served alongside men and women from all walks of life who bear scars of all kinds as a result of their service to our country. I sent some of them into battle myself. Those are tough decisions. There are a few things I take as seriously as my commitment to servicemen and women when they come home. They deserve better than a bill with this many unknowns that poses this many risks with this high a cost based on so little information or engagement from the administration. Time is of the essence, especially for those veterans who are sick and dying because of exposures they have experienced. But voting for this bill this afternoon does not get us any closer to the finish line for them than we were this morning. In military rifle range terms, we are ready, fire, aim. There is no escaping the fact that we have a lot more work to do. Ranking Member Bost's amendment will give us the time and the information we need to do that work. I will be voting in support of it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, General Bergman. I now recognize Representative Dr. Ruiz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me associate myself with the remarks of our esteemed Chairman Takano in his opposition to this amendment in the nature of a substitute. This amendment of a nature of the substitute will only delay benefits to veterans who are currently dying and becoming delayed casualties of war. This is an ongoing illness and threat to their lives as we speak. They need the care right now, and they cannot wait. the amendment in the nature of a substitute will supplant all the work that the committees and the member staff, the VSOs, and all the other advocates have worked on for years to develop legislation that would address the increasing need for benefits for toxic exposed veterans. This amendment in the nature of a substitute is just asking for a study after study after study with absolutely no action. Although these studies requests are necessary information from the VA on impacts and implementation of the bill, this is all information that the VA can provide while we continue to work through the legislative process on HR 3967. So this amendment in the nature of a substitute would only further delay benefits to toxic exposed veterans by slowing down the legislative process to gather information that Congress can acquire while the bill, as introduced, is moved through the process. So moving HR 3967, honoring our PACT Act, as introduced, will expedite a response on the items listed on this amendment in the nature of a substitute. And with all the respect that I have for the ranking member and all the veterans that serve on this committee, I also have much respect for our Vietnam veterans. So I would just like to have a moment of pause and reflection and remind everybody on this committee that these are the same arguments that we have just heard used to delay care and benefits for Vietnam veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange. And the veterans, especially our Vietnam veterans, have coined a term, delay until dead. Delay until dead, which infuriates our veterans now because this process is delayed and delayed and delayed until most of our Vietnam veterans who died of illnesses due to Agent Orange were dead until Agent Orange was finally recognized as a presumption of associated illness. Also, what I'm hearing from our colleagues is a major concern for the institution. It is an institution-centered, institution-first concern. They're concerned about the VA institution. They're concerned about the providers. They're concerned, even more concerned about the facilities and the strain and stress that this would cause on buildings. Well, I think that we should take a patient-centered, veterans-first approach and be concerned about our veterans who are dying currently, who are requiring 100% oxygen, unable to breathe, and dyspnea, who are falling into severe depression because they cannot take care of their families and they cannot work anymore due to their constrictive bronchiolitis and other pulmonary illnesses. So if we take a veterans first approach, we will understand that they need the care right now. Otherwise, if we implement a study that takes years and years, then they will be delayed. There will be more delayed casualties of war, and there will be more individuals who will succumb to their illness and struggle and sacrifice. You will see more widows. You will see more childless, fatherless, motherless children who are amongst us. And so I urge everybody to vote no for this amendment in the nature of the substitute. I urge a yes vote and expedited care for these veterans who have been exposed to burn pits and other toxic exposures, and a definite strong yes vote for HR 3967, honoring our PACT Act. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Rees. I understand it's Mr. Banks would like to speak to the motion, speak to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's be clear about one thing. It was the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, not the House Veterans Affairs Committee, that reported the TEAM Act out of the committee last Congress. When I was informed about this from the CBO that the TEAM Act could potentially cost hundreds of billions of dollars in new mandatory funding, I immediately directed my staff to find acceptable offsets and other ways to move forward in a fiscally responsible manner. And that's the expectation I would have of any of my colleagues. During my time on this committee, for 5 years, we've always had informal cost estimates and input from the administration on bills reported out of the committee, but not this time. As a Republican on the committee, as a veteran on this committee, I'm committed to getting information like that out to all of our members, not just on this committee, but all of our colleagues who will vote on a bill like this when it reaches the floor. And we just don't have that information currently as you're asking us to vote on this in this markup today. Ranking Member Bost's amendment is not just common sense, it's responsible. And that's why I would urge all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to vote for the amendment. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. I will have the committee recess until after the final vote. We have 4 votes, so we'll have to come back to order after the final vote of this series. So the committee will stand in recess until after the final vote of this series. we were considering the amendment in the nature of a substitute. There was discussion on the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mr. Bost. We had just finished comments from the gentleman from Indiana. Are there any other members who wish to speak to the amendment? Mr. Mann, you recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Takano, for allowing me to speak during this markup. I appreciate the traditional bipartisan nature of this committee and everyone's willingness to put politics aside to help our nation's heroes. We have a responsibility to ensure that our veterans receive the treatment they deserve after their service. I know toxic exposure is a priority for me and members of this committee. While I agree with the members of this committee that we need to find a way forward to care for our veterans who were exposed to toxins, I have concerns the legislation we are marking up today is premature, and thus I support this amendment. My first concern is the cost. We have not received a CBO score on this bill, so we do not know how much this will cost the taxpayers. Additionally, we have not been provided any offsets or pay for this legislation. I'm concerned this new spending would take away from our current veteran care and continue ballooning our national debt. My second concern is the lack of information from the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Biden administration. We've asked the VA for information on the implementation requirements and staffing needs to carry out this legislation. We have not received any of the information needed in order to move forward with this bill. Additionally, we have not heard from the Biden administration on their position on the bill. I believe if we delayed moving this legislation until after the VA provides this much needed information, we could move forward with a better picture and the best path forward. With toxic exposure being such a significantly high priority, I want to ensure we are not moving forward prematurely with legislation that does not meet the needs of our veterans. I'll continue to support efforts that are bipartisan, fiscally responsible, and scientifically sound for our nation's heroes. I agree with what was mentioned before. This feels like ready, fire, aim. Again, reporting this bill out of committee today gets us no closer to the finish line for toxic exposure veterans and their families. The majority is reporting a bill that has no viable path to success. There's no way around the fact that we need information from the VA. We need engagement with the Biden administration. We need to coordinate with the Senate VA committee and have an honest discussion about how we can find a practical path forward. Today's vote does nothing but give veterans and their families premature hope. We should be rolling up our sleeves and getting to work on real solutions for toxic exposed veterans and clearly communicate to them what they should expect. Thus, I support this amendment and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. Dr. Murphy, I understand that you wish to be recognized.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
You recognized for 5 minutes.
Question, do I need to use the talk button logistically? All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for recognition. Actually, thank you especially for showing up in person. We just walked out of a chamber where 400 of us were together for almost 2 hours. And I believe everybody on the committee really, you know, we've seen that it can be done safely, and it'd be great to see everybody's shining faces in these committee rooms. So as a member of Congress whose veteran population is more than 89,000 in my district, I have 1/7 of my constituency being veterans. I take the treating the responsibilities of serving on this critical committee with the utmost reverence. With so many veterans and over 52,000 active duty military service members in my district, I am acutely aware of the sacrifices that these heroic and brave men and women have made for our beloved country and continue to make every day. I'm very proud of them and want to ensure that their medical needs are met when they are on active duty and when they are separate from armed forces and transition to the VA medical system. I, like every other member of this august committee, have an unfailing desire to satisfy the medical needs of our veterans who are exposed to toxins while fulfilling their duties to our beloved nation. As many might know, I am a practicing physician, and I have taken care of veterans for over 30 years and actually continue to do it to this day for a variety of conditions. I've looked at this legislation, somewhat perplexed, to be very honest with you, at some of the chemicals involved because they're everyday chemicals. I want our legislation to be meaningful. I want it to have purpose. I actually have sponsored the Camp Lejeune Justice Act, which looks at toxic exposures at Camp Lejeune for 30 years. This is a critical issue that is important to me. I applaud our chairman for his unwavering support of our veterans. However, in this case, I am supportive of the ranking member Boss amendment in the nature of a substitute. This amendment allows the VA time to actually study the impact of 3967 on the VA medical system. For example, does the VA medical system have the capacity to treat the thousands of additional veterans who become eligible to use because of this? That's a real question. I've been in the VA system. The VA system now has an exceedingly difficult time in recruiting providers for the workload that they have today. We need to know these answers. The VA has yet to answer this very basic and pivotal question, and for many others that are related to provisions within this bill. I know this for a fact. We also need to have an open and transparent process to assess the full cost implications of this bill. We simply cannot just spend our way because of emotional needs, haphazardly promising sweeping legislation that entitles our veterans to additional care, but does not, it may amount literally to a hollow promise. It actively does them a disservice. For instance, there is no clear cost estimate at this point that the Biden administration and the CBO have agreed upon. This also may be considered to be due to the incredibly high cost that preliminary estimates have seen, over $1 trillion in mandatory spending over 10 years and billions of dollars of contingency of discretionary spending over the next decade. Please, I think everybody is on the same page on this committee that they are supportive of our veterans, but we have a responsibility to this nation that we do due diligence in this issue. This issue requires bipartisan and support because of its severity and importance. Those issues are without question. However, I strongly believe that at this juncture, a vote on Chairman Takano's bill is premature. We have not, in my opinion, done due diligence on this issue, its cost, its implications to the VA system. Please understand, I am in no way stating we hold off on coming up with a solution over this issue over an indefinite period, but a 90-day period to actually look at this issue critically is actually prudent when discussing this issue. I want to thank on the committee for their commitment to every single person, to our veterans who have done so much for us, and look forward to working with committee members on this important bipartisan issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. Is there any other member of the committee who wishes to comment on the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
Chairman Takano asks to be recognized.
Mr. Nels.
Chair.
Mr. Nels, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. As a veteran who deployed in 3 tours overseas, I assure you that I know a little bit about the costs of war. As a representative of Texas 22nd District, the home of many proud veterans, I am committed to supporting my brothers and sisters in arms. And as a ranking member of the DAMA subcommittee, I believe that we need to find a way to make VA benefits and care more accessible for those veterans who were exposed to toxic substances. We must also prioritize research that allows us to more fully understand the conditions linked to toxic exposures and better treat them. However, we must do this in a way that is compassionate, fiscally responsible, and administratively sound. I am supporting the Ranking Member Boss amendment and believe we cannot continue this markup without more detailed information on this bill. We have not received reliable cost estimates from the CBO or VA, but the initial estimates we have are in the hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars in mandatory spending alone. The VA has never received this level of funding, and we frankly have no idea how they would absorb it into an already heavily burdened system. This is because VA has not yet provided views on the bill. The Biden administration has not either. We therefore have no insight whatsoever as to how this bill would impact VA if enacted. This is particularly concerning because as of June 19th, 2021, yesterday, VBA is sitting at a backlog of nearly 191,000 claims. And the VA expects that backlog rise due to claims for the 3 new Agent Orange presumptive conditions. Legislation of this scope could increase that number drastically, putting veterans already waiting for decisions at risk. Furthermore, there are currently over 300,000 exams pending due to the pandemic. We do not know how that number would be affected. How would that number be affected by this legislation? Mr. Chairman, addressing the way the VA handles toxic exposure claims is a mutually shared goal among everybody in this committee. those who have served and those who have not. It is also a shared goal in the Senate. We must work together with our colleagues in the Senate, veterans and stakeholders, to put forward a bill that makes sense. And as I previously mentioned, I have served with brave men and women from all walks of life. Some of them made the ultimate sacrifice. Others return home and are affected in various ways to this day by their service. I am committed to finding a path forward that addresses the needs of toxic, exposed veterans. It's fair to the taxpayers and balances the needs of the VA. Unfortunately, I do not believe we can do that today. Thank you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Nels. I now will recognize Mr. Moore, who is on the virtual platform. Mr. Moore, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I'm very supportive of providing the absolute best benefits possible for our veterans, we must know that the decisions that Congress makes cannot be in a vacuum. The process of advancing the bill today before us is clearly being rushed, and it is unwise to move forward without knowing all the facts. How can we move forward on this bill with so many unanswered questions on cost and the impact it will have on other VA services? As ranking member of Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity, I am keenly aware of the challenges our economy faces in overcoming COVID-19. The return to the strongest economy in the world's history, built by pro-growth policies, the Republicans in Congress and President Trump, is being held captive by poor decisions of the majority in the Biden administration. These decisions have led to billions in spending, increased inflation, and sluggish job growth. We need to be prepared. We need to be preparing our veterans for the 21st century. And I fear this bill before us today would hamper the VA's ability to provide quality services for veterans. The Veteran Readiness and Employment Program provides individualized reemployment and rehabilitation services to service-connected disabled veterans. The underlying bill will surely create a backlog of new claims for disability benefits. This will result in longer delays for veterans to gain the availability of the VRNE that would put them back to work and on the right track to meaningful employment. I'm also concerned that the increased demands put on disability claims processing will impact the number of counselors available to help veterans in this program. The VA has made great strides to meet the 1 to 125 veteran to counselor ratio. We have no idea what impact this will have on that ratio. I'm also concerned that the increased demand on disability claims processing will inevitably impact the amount of overtime dollars available to processing the VA benefits like the GI Bill. For years, the VA officials have relied on the availability of the overtime funds and the lower GI Bill to processing times during peak enrollments in the fall and early spring. If it is safe to assume that this funding won't be available if there is an increased pressure to reduce backlogs that will be created by the underlying bill. I say it is safe to assume because, again, we don't know with 100% certainty what we are pushing and what this bill will do without knowing all the facts. This is why I'm supportive of Ranking Member Boss' amendment that would require answers to my and other members' important questions about this bill's impact moving forward. The people I represent in the 2nd District of Alabama are incredibly patriotic. They sent me to Washington to look after our veterans' best interests. However, they realize that we can't do that and mortgage our children's future at the same time. I'm afraid that if I go forward with this bill without getting the answers to these questions, we'll be making a huge mistake. I urge the adoption of the Boss Amendment in the nature of a substitute. And with that, sir, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Are there any other members who wish to comment on the Boss Amendment in the nature of a substitute? If not, the question is on the Boss Amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay.
Aye.
No. Nay.
The nays or the noes have it. A recorded vote, an opinion chair of the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. There is a recorded vote requested. Is there a sufficient second? There is. Pursuant to Committee Rule 4, further proceedings on the amendment shall be postponed. Now, is there further debate On HR 3967, the members wish to comment on 3967, dead line bill. Dr. Ruiz, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, thank you, Chairman Takano, for your work and strong leadership on toxic exposure and burn pits, and for marking up this important piece of legislation today. Months and even years after being exposed to toxic burn pits, service members and veterans are getting sick with illnesses like cancer, respiratory diseases, and autoimmune diseases. And if that isn't bad enough, they have too many hoops to jump through to get help from the VA. And in the end, more than 70% of claims are still being denied, which is why burn pits are being called the Agent Orange of our generation. As a physician and representative of a large veteran population, I am committed to ensuring our service members have access to the healthcare they earned and deserve. That is why I've been a fierce advocate of these issues for years after learning about the health effects of burn pits from my constituent, Jennifer Kepner. Jennifer was 39 years old. She's an Air Force veteran with a healthy lifestyle and no other risk factors who was battling pancreatic cancer, which her oncologist determined was likely linked to her exposure to burn pits. We lost Jennifer in 2017, but I have continued her fight, which is why I founded the bipartisan bicameral burn pits caucus and have introduced a number of bills and amendments over the years to address this issue. Most recently, I reintroduced the bipartisan bicameral presumptive benefits for warfighters exposed to burn pits and other toxins act, along with Congressman Fitzpatrick and Senators Gillibrand and Rubio. I want to thank Chairman Takano for working with me to include several of those provisions in the Honoring Our Pact Act, which we are considering here today. The Honoring Our Pact Act will help our veterans get the care they have earned and deserve after being exposed to burn pits and other dangerous toxins during their service to our country. It will help veterans like Blake Weller, a field representative in my Hemet district office, and Patrick Keplinger, a former field representative in my office, who are both U.S. Marine veterans who were exposed to toxic burn pits during their military service. We cannot send Americans to war and then complain that it costs too much to care for them when they are sick because of the injuries they sustained while serving our country, or illnesses that manifest years after exposure to burn pits or toxic chemicals and become delayed casualties of war. Veterans in this country need advocates, not obstacles when seeking the care they deserve. And so I urge my colleagues to support this crucial and much needed piece of legislation. And again, I want to really thank Chairman Takano for his tireless work on this critical issue. And if my Republican colleagues are concerned about the budgetary impacts, then I invite them, in fact, to vote against giving sick veterans the health care they need and we promised. But I sincerely hope that there is no price to the service and the sacrifice that our veterans and their fellow service members when they were in war as well, and all of our veterans gave to our country. And so when we send them to war, we make a promise and we need to honor that pact. And that's why we must vote to pass the Honor Our Pact Act in order to help our veterans today out of this committee so it can go to the House floor. And I highly urge that they reconsider their opposition to this bill and that they vote with us in support of our veterans in giving them the benefits and the health care and life-saving treatment supported through the VA that they deserve in order to live a life with opportunity and promise and for their families. So thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Ruiz. I will, if there is not a member of the Republican or the minority party that wishes to be recognized, I'm going to call on Ms. Luria. Ms. Luria, I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The work of this committee is often a matter of life and death, and today's markup is no exception. This committee set out to address one of the most pressing healthcare issues facing veterans today, securing benefits and primary coverage for veterans exposed to toxic substances while serving overseas, and who now suffer from a variety of serious and even fatal illnesses. We heard testimony from experts, veteran service organizations, and VA officials over the last few months. We debated a dozen or more pieces of legislation on toxic exposure, and I'm grateful for the work of my colleagues. I'm proud to see several components of the Covenant Act, a bill that I introduced earlier this year, included in this omnibus legislation that we're considering today. We did not shy away from putting together a bold and comprehensive legislative package that will get veterans the care that they've earned. All of us know how long the veterans of Vietnam waited for benefits. All of us understand that we cannot continue to allow history to repeat itself for our veterans. The Honoring Our Pact Act will put an end to this shameful history by recognizing toxic exposure as a cost of war. Under our bill, any veteran who served in the Middle East, Southwest Asia, East Africa, and the Philippines can get access to benefits and primary care if they developed up to 23 different types of illnesses and cancers. This is the investment our country must make in the men and women who serve. This is the cost of war. The veterans who are suffering today cannot wait any longer. Their families are counting on us, and we must deliver. It is for their sake that I strongly urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support the Honoring Our Pact Act. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Chairwoman, Chair Luria. I thank you and Dr. Ruiz for your very substantive contributions to the PACT Act. I will now recognize Representative Gallego for 5 minutes. Representative Gallego.
It's okay. I yield back my time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gallego. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized? All right. If there's no further debate on the bill on HR 3967, we'll now move to the unfinished business of the recorded votes, which were postponed. The recorded vote. The question now occurs on agreeing to the Boston Amendment in the nature of a substitute on which a recorded vote was ordered. The clerk shall call the roll.
Ms. Brownlee.
Brownlee votes no.
Mr. Lamb.
Lamb votes no.
Mr. Levin.
Levin votes no.
Mr. Pappas. Mr. Pappas. Ms. Loria.
Loria votes no.
Mr. Mervan.
Mervan votes no.
Mr. Sablon. Mr. Sablon. Ms. Underwood.
Underwood votes no.
Mr. Allred.
Allred votes no.
Ms. Frankel. Ms. Frankel. Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown. Ms. Slotkin.
Brown votes no. Brown votes no.
Ms. Slotkin.
Slotkin votes no.
Okay, they're going to come back to me, I think. Okay. Franco votes no.
Mr. Trone. Ms. Capter. Ms. Capter. Dr. Ruiz.
Ruiz votes no.
Mr. Gallego.
Gallego votes no.
Mr. Bost. Ms. Radewagen. Ms. Radewagen. Mr. Bergman. Mr. Banks.
Yes.
Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy. Dr. Murphy.
Dr. Murphy votes yes.
Mr. Mann.
As I feel, the roll call vote is taking place right now, which would have been in the middle of my.
Brown, we can hear you.
Did you get that Mann voted yes?
Mr. Moore.
Moore is a yes.
Ms. Mace.
Mace is a yes.
Mr. Cawthorn. Mr. Cawthorn. Mr. Nels.
Nels, yes.
Mr. Rosendale.
Rosendale's a yes.
Dr. Miller Meets. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Sablon. Ms. Frankel.
No.
Ms. Capter. Ms. Radewagen. Mr. Roy. Mr. Cawthorn. Mr. Chairman.
Chairman votes no.
Again, since 1:48 a.m., Miami-Dade Fire Rescue has not stopped.
Mr. Chairman, how is Mr. Brown recorded?
Madam Clerk, how is Mr. Brown recorded?
Mr. Brown is recorded as a no.
Mr. Brown, you're recorded as a no.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The clerk will report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, for this vote, there are 10 ayes and 14 noes.
The motion, the amendment in the nature of a substitute is not agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Is there further debate on HR 3967? If not, I recognize Vice Chairman, Mr. Lamb for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the bill HR 3967 be moved out of committee.
All those in favor of moving HR 3967 and reporting favorably through the House will say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Again, we place seismic devices on the building. Any stress packs. Enlarge it.
The motion to report is agreed to. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes. Ms. Lurie, you're calling for a recorded vote? A recorded vote has been requested. Is there a sufficient second?
I second.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Brownlee.
Brownlee, aye.
Mr. Lamb.
Yes.
Mr. Levin.
Aye.
Mr. Pappas. Mr. Pappas. Ms. Loria.
Aye.
Mr. Mervan.
Aye.
Mr. Sablon. Mr. Sablon. Ms. Underwood.
Underwood is a yes.
Mr. Allred.
Aye.
Ms. Frankel.
Aye.
Mr. Brown.
Aye. Brown votes aye.
Ms. Slotkin. Aye. Mr. Trone. Ms. Capter. Ms. Capter. Dr. Ruiz.
Ruiz votes aye.
Mr. Gallego.
Gallego votes aye.
Mr. Bost.
No.
Ms. Radewagen. Ms. Radewagen. Mr. Bergman.
No.
Mr. Banks.
No.
Mr. Roy.
No.
Dr. Murphy.
No.
Mr. Mann.
No.
Mr. Moore.
No.
Ms. Mace.
No.
Mr. Cawthorn. Mr. Cawthorn. Mr. Nels.
No.
Mr. Rosendale.
No.
Dr. Miller Meeks. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Sablon. Ms. Capter. Ms. Radewagen. Mr. Cawthorn. Mr. Chairman.
The chairman votes aye. The clerk will report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, for this vote, there are 14 ayes and 11 noes.
The motion to report is agreed to, and without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes without objection.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority and supplemental, additional, and dissenting views on HR 3967.
Without objection. Well, this concludes the business of the markup. Does the ranking member or any other member wish to be recognized before we adjourn? Ranking Member Bost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and an opportunity to close. I am disappointed in the results of this markup today. There is no way for Congress to conduct, this is no way for Congress to conduct business. To be clear, the Honor Our Pact Act may have passed out of committee today, but we are no closer to providing the care and benefits to toxic exposed veterans than we were before we started the markup. So I remain committed to finding the workable path forward for thousands of toxic exposed veterans and their families who need our help. And I want to work with Chairman Takano, Chairman Tester, Ranking Member Moran, VA, and VSOs to find a realistic, scientific, sound, and financial responsible way to provide this to them. We should have done that before reporting the bill out of committee. This is why I asked the chairman this week to postpone this markup so that we could accomplish these five things. First, get views, cost estimates, and impact statements from VA. Second, get reliable cost estimates from CBO and OMB and have the opportunity to reconcile them. Third, get meaningful input and engage from the Biden administration. Fourth, get an agreement with Chairman Tester and Ranking Member Moran on how to move forward. And finally, engage in an open public dialogue on this issue in light of all of the above information. We have none of these five things right now, but better late than never. The VA has 7 weeks since our hearing to provide views and cost estimates on toxic exposure bills under consideration. They've had longer than that since the Senate held an earlier hearing on many of those same bills. Toxic exposed veterans are sick and dying. VA has found time to do a lot of work on much less important issues, but it's past time for the Biden administration to put things first and get us the information that we need from them on toxic exposures. I will be circulating a letter today asking the committee members to join me in calling for the president and the secretary to provide this information asked for in the amendment and everything that it would have required. So I hope that even those that voted against my amendment will recognize that it is important for us to get this information. And we need to move forward. I hope they're going to do it very, very quickly, but I don't believe that we're going to be able to get it done at the speed in which they're moving that my amendment would have done anyway, which is the 90 days. And I'd almost be willing to bet on that. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for allowing me to close, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost, and I appreciate your participation and the participation of all members. I do see that we have other members who wish to comment before we adjourn. Dr. Ruiz, I believe you seek recognition. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I just want to really applaud your fierce advocacy for our veterans who have been exposed to toxic chemicals and burn pits. This was an incredibly well-run hearing, and I urge my colleagues who voted no against providing the relief and care that our veterans who are dying from burn pits, that they reconsider their vote when it goes to the House floor. This is a real major milestone, and once it goes to the floor, there won't be any hiding behind any institution first, facility first arguments. This is about putting veterans first, making sure that their families get the care and the aid that they need with all due respect, and to make sure that we once and for all put an end to the long wait that veterans have had to endure in getting their care and their benefits due to respiratory illnesses, cancers, autoimmune diseases from their exposure to burn pits. The folks on the other side are saying that we're rushing this. I beg to differ, and I would ask you to ask the widows of those veterans who have died because of their exposures to burn pits if we are rushing this. They're going to tell you that this is way too damn late for us to take action for burn pits because now their children are without a father or without a mother. And I also want to remind everybody that we've already had some hearings on burn pits from previous Congresses, and there have been public debate, public conversations, especially from our courageous VSOs and Burn Pits 360 members and others who have been shouting from the rooftops that it is time to act on burn pits right now because we are having delayed casualties of war. They are on life support, and we need to provide them the means to get the treatment and the benefits so that they can live a life with dignity and they can be recognized once and for all. And we can make our promise to the Vietnam veterans real, that we will not have another Agent Orange in our generation. We will not delay until they're dead, that we will provide the care that they need right now. And so with that, I applaud every single member who voted for this bill to move to the House floor. And I encourage those who voted against giving veterans the benefits that they need right now to stay alive and to live a life with dignity, that they change their vote when this vote comes to the House floor, because it will come to the House floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good job.
Thank you, Dr. Rees. Is there any other member of the committee who seeks recognition before we adjourn?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Roy, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I thank the chairman, and I apologize. I got here at the tail end. We had a 29-hour marathon antitrust hearing in the Judiciary Committee, and then obviously we were voting on the floor. So I wish I'd have been here for the beginning of it, and certainly take to heart the comments of our colleague here about the importance of this to our veterans. I mean, I represent, 75, 80,000 veterans in Central Texas, San Antonio, Military City, USA. Obviously critically important. And nobody here, not one individual in this committee, doesn't want to take care of veterans who have been exposed in this way, have been dealing with toxic exposure. Not one member of the committee. The difference here is that we've got real concerns about the amount of information available to us, about the hearings, about the lack of available interaction from the Biden administration, about the costs, upwards of $300 billion to $1 trillion. CBO estimates not here. I mean, I'm going down the laundry list of things we all know. This is just a basic responsible duty of things that we ought to do as a committee to get this right. And we're not doing that. I mean, and I just said something similar in the Judiciary Committee. I don't get a chance to amend this on the floor of the House. The House is fundamentally broken. So in terms of the floor, right? So, whatever we kick out of here a committee, it goes to Rules Committee and then some rooms that I'm not a part of that then gets decided on what the vote is on the floor. And then there's a take it or leave it vote. And then it's kicked over to the Senate. And then there's a bunch of speeches and people patting themselves on the back. And we don't actually sit down and do the hard work of figuring out what we're going to do for veterans. That's literally what's about to happen. Why would we do that? This is the place where we should come to some agreement. And if it kicks out of here unanimously, then, or at least in a strong bipartisan vote, then you get to the floor and you can have a real debate with people getting behind it and then work out something with the Senate. Right now, it's going out on party lines because we have fundamental disagreements, not on the purpose, but on the actual information behind this and our concerns about the overall cost, and not just writing a blank check, but rather figuring out the right way to do this in an affordable way and to make it actually work. So with that, I just wish we would revisit this and address it here in committee before kicking it to the floor. As the ranking member said, it's not going to get us anywhere. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Is there any other member of the committee who wishes to make a comment before we adjourn? Seeing none, I will now just make my final comment. Let me just say that I am very, very pleased that we were able to move the bill out of the committee today. And I will reiterate what I said earlier to the ranking member and all members, including Mr. Roy, who just appeared. This is not the final pass. You did have an opportunity in committee today to amend, to make more than one amendment. We had one amendment filed. I understand and empathize with your concerns about the cost of the bill and the information that has not fully come to fruition. But that being said, I do believe that the best place we can be is to move with the momentum. that we do have an evenly divided Senate, but they passed their bill on voice, and substantively, it is our bill is I won't say insignificantly different, but we have more presumptions in our bill. The Senate has actually passed muster on the more prevalent and expensive presumptions. I actually don't think our bills are that much more far apart, but our bill is clearly more expansive. It's more expansive. We know that the Secretary has undertaken rulemaking on presumptions, and that is going to also be factored in. So we have a moving target as far as what the total cost of this bill will be. But rest assured, we'll be working together in discussions on the final form of a bill that comes forward. And I want you to recognize that we're not, I, as chairman, do not want to place any member of this committee in opposition to helping veterans. I know that's where you're coming from. So I will recognize as such where you're coming from with your plea to slow this down. But I don't believe we need to slow it down. I believe that we can have things working in parallel, and we will be working together. We'll be talking this out, but I do believe that 2021 will be the year that we pass comprehensive legislation to recognize toxic exposure as a cost of war. Our meeting today brings us closer to that critical goal, notwithstanding what my counterpart has said that we're no closer. I do believe we're closer. We are now in a position to really negotiate in earnest with the Senate, and Ranking Member Bost will be in the room where it happens. You will all be able to contribute to those discussions, and I am elated at the fact that we will have an opportunity this year to do something transformative for our veterans, and I say that you will all be a part of that. I know you will be. So thank you. And with that, the committee shall adjourn.